Now we will go to Addis for the first question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Technical no. Okay. My name is Hallelujah Lube. I work for the African and U.S. magazine. My question goes to Deputy Chairperson Erastus Mwencha. Most of the maritime problems that we're witnessing in the continent are there spillover effects, national governance, and other problems in the mainland Africa. So, what is the strategy of the African Union to deal with the socio-economic problems that cause this piracy or other types of maritime insecurity? And a related question. For example, the African Union has this working on the realization and operationalization of the African standby force this year. Does it have the African standby force will have a navy, an African navy that will deal with continental maritime problems? Thanks.
Thank you very much for your important question. I hope I got you well. The first question was about the challenge of governance and how we can secure our coastlines. Yes, we do recognize that the problem of governance is indeed big in terms of Africa having a coherent strategy to be able to tackle the issue of maritime security and safety. And as you know, the problem that is on land reflects itself in the sea. And if you take the case of what is happening in Somalia, the problem is not really at the sea. The problem is in the land. And if you have good governance and you have good structures in any African country, these issues are not likely to manifest them in the sea. For Africa, we know that having a hole even in one country, like in the case of Somalia, it affects everybody else in the continent. So that's why I said early on that this is a global problem and we can only have global solutions. But for Africa, we have to do something for ourselves. We have developed and we're developing a strategy. That strategy has responsibility at your individual level, at the national level, and in the continental level. And that strategy requires that, first of all, we share information, we coordinate, we work together within the continent, and we have a capacity to be able to, have our coastlines policed and safeguarded from international pirates, but also those that do illegal fishing, toxic waste, and the rest. That requires resources to do that. And that is an element that we also seek to partner with the rest of the international community to help each other to be able to tackle the problem. Now, the second part of your question was, how is the African standby force being developed, and we need to have capacity, like naval capacity to do that. Yes, in the long run, that is indeed our strategy. And as you know, for instance, the Eastbridge, we are now drilling, we are now preparing, first of all, the first elements of it to be able to be mobilized at short notice and have adequate capacity and capability. But yes, we are looking at that as in the long term. That would be one of the key elements for the standby forces for the continent.
Thank you very much, sir. We will stay with Addis for the second question. And as a reminder, please speak clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Fred Enna from the Nigerian Guardian newspapers. And my question is actually directed to Ambassador Carson. There is still a lingering concern in many African countries that despite the maritime problems we have, Africom might eventually end up being an instrument for direct intervention in African countries where U.S. interests are perceived to be under threat. And we take cases like the maritime situation in Nigeria, where the oil and gas industry is facing internal domestic problems. In the course of this meeting you're having in Stuttgart, has there been any serious discussion as to how to clear the issue, because it's still a concern, and many people think the effectiveness of Africom is going to depend solely on how well Africans will believe that it's a collective effort and not an instrument to direct U.S. intervention in African domestic policy in specific countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. African states are sovereign. African states have a responsibility to protect their natural resources. They have a responsibility to protect their people. It is not the responsibility of the U.S. government to do this. The U.S. government can offer collaboration, cooperation, and assistance to individual African states, and it can also work together with important regional organizations like the African Union, which we are doing here in this conference. But the primary responsibility for protection of a country's sovereignty, its people, its territory, and its resources both on and offshore rest with those governments and sub-regional organizations. Indeed, we do, as a nation, have interests, commercial and business interests in those countries, but those assets, especially the ones you're referring to, oil and gas, are under the protection of the host nation governments. We can only play an important secondary and sometimes tertiary role, but we have no responsibilities and certainly have no intent of injecting ourselves into the protection of these assets.
Thank you very much for that question. Now we will go to Paris for the next question.
Good morning, dear gentlemen. I would like to ask a question to General Ward. It would be a very technical question. We are speaking about piracy, and the problem is the efficiency of these acts of piracy. And it is very strange to feel or to know that far in the sea, ships are identified and captured by pirates, which is surprising since they have technical ways of acting which are not related to the society in Somalia where they live. On the same range, there is another problem which has been raised by Der Spiegel on the 24th of November 2008, saying that the payment of ransoms have been done through, for example, English banks. And the last point is that the pirates are a lot of times released on the fact that there is no law to judge them. So I am asking the following question: is there a, let's say, as they say in French, laissez-faire? I mean, something they let to do concerning these pirates from the Occidental world. And my paper is monthly Africally. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. You directed it to me, but the context of it seems more appropriate to my colleagues to my left or to my right here. with respect to some of the policy implications of apprehension, laws associated therein, as well as the issue of payments of ransoms, et cetera, et cetera. To be sure, as you indicated, the seas and oceans are very vast, and the ability of those who would conduct piracy acts to operate on those vast oceans is quite extensive, as I believe you pointed out. Technical means exist so far insofar as identifying vessels, etc. But in order to thoroughly understand a process procedure called interrogation, being close enough to understand intent goes on, and that's the work that's being done by the international community as a part of the efforts being undertaken in the Indian Ocean and elsewhere to protect the global shipping lanes, and particularly in that part of the world. I think those efforts are efforts that will continue with respect to once a suspected pirate is apprehended or not, the disposition of what goes on. Clearly those are events and activities that are determined not by the militaries and navies who perform the anti-piracy work at sea, but clearly in the form of the responsibility of the nations of the world, the diplomats, other international bodies, the African Union, the nations of the continent, but also those who are also concerned to determine the disposition of and further steps that are being taken in response to addressing that symptom of what goes on because of the lack of a effective government there in Somalia. And I'll stop at that and certainly leave it to any of my other colleagues to respond further.